Jiao, a wonderful collection of encounters and dialogues and great koans that I've been spending quite a bit of time with recently and thoroughly enjoying. There are so many hidden treasures in this record of a great, great teacher. A teacher who lived, they say, anywhere between the age of 100 and 120. So an incredibly seasoned old monk, old Jiao. And this particular case caught my attention because it features an unusual character who comes to visit Jiao. And this is the character of a magistrate. Would have been a provincial magistrate or a government official overseeing the land and area and temple too, in which Jiao was practicing. And in a way it caught my attention because this is a collision, if you like, between the secular world stepping into the so-called practiced world or world of Buddhism. And it's always very interesting to see what happens when these two supposedly separate paths cross. In fact, right through the record of Jiao is simply referred to as the master. And this character who comes in is simply called the magistrate. And both master and magistrate actually share the same etymological root. Very interesting. They both cleave to the law. But these are very different kinds of laws. The magistrate, of course, is responsible for the law of the land, the rules and regulations to keep the peace. Whereas the master, old Jiao, is responsible for the law of the Dharma, the law of ceaseless change, of one thing becoming another, the law of each and everything, the law of every moment of our lives, keeping the peace here in the Dharma is Jiao's business. But what's so beautiful about this case is that we come to see that these supposedly different laws or different people nevertheless share something even more than an etymological root. This case really does bring to our attention the fact that everyday activity is Zazen. Zazen is everyday activity. Where is the line between the so-called law of the land and the law of the Dharma? Aren't they so wonderfully intermixed? Isn't that the place we find ourselves, particularly now where laws are being invented on the hop all the time in order to keep us safe, in order to improvise ways of taking care of how we are, how we can be together. And it's a bumbling business. It's not a neat story. We are in a great creative improvisation just here. And I love that this case, which we're about to step into, explores the nature of all of this and explores how we don't have to hold ourselves apart from the so-called difficulty of where we are. Not at all. Perhaps the only difficulty there is the word difficulty itself. So let's step in to this case, this encounter, just as this magistrate does into the dojo where Jiao would have been practicing. I've always loved that Jiao's particular practice place was nothing spectacular, a very humble affair. Even Jiao's chair, which he liked to sit on occasionally, had a broken leg, which he refused to have mended in any kind of professional way.
Recording stopped.
Instead, he simply bound a found twig or a found branch from the forest around his temple to that chair, because that was fine. That was exactly the kind of can-do, the kind of
recording in progress.
There's another intruder actually in this particular dojo today, but you're welcome here too. So this magistrate steps into this very humble, simple-looking temple, and this magistrate would have found a collection of people just like we are here, seated around perhaps the perimeter of the dojo as you are in Kunyani House just now. And this magistrate looks around. Remember, it's his job to be keeping check on everything that's going on in the provinces, everything that's going on in his area of responsibility. And he looks around this room and he says a very interesting thing. He says, do you do practice or not? It's actually a very lovely question. We can see the magistrate could be perhaps saying this in absolute innocence here, very much along the lines of, what on earth are you doing? Are you doing anything at all? It really doesn't look like very much. You're sitting around facing the wall, very still, very quiet. I'm used to doing all sorts of things. This magistrate would have been a great doer, very busy person. And to step into a place like this of stillness and quiet, how strange. How strange it must be for anybody to step into a place like this of stillness and quiet and ask, what are you doing? What do you do here with a practice? And perhaps there could be a little edge here to this magistrate's question. Perhaps this magistrate is a little bit familiar with some of the strange and confounding sayings of the old teachers like Zhao Zhou. You can readily believe that the words of Zhao Zhou would have penetrated all of the hills around that particular temple, all the way into cramped offices too. And perhaps some of these words had roused the curiosity of this magistrate. And one of the things the magistrate may have heard was something along the lines of this so-called not doing that is at the heart of a Zen practice, this not doing. And if so, then perhaps this magistrate is offering somewhat of a challenge. Are you doing or not doing in this place? What is the character of your practice here? How are you upholding the way? How are you practicing? And Zhao Zhou, being the seasoned teacher that he was, receives all of this, no doubt. Every dimension of this probing or questioning or confusion of this magistrate, receives all of it quietly with his customary grace and responds like this. He says, if I did practice, I would be in serious difficulty. How interesting. If I did practice, I would be in serious difficulty. What's going on here with Zhao Zhou? What's he inviting this magistrate and all of us here to see, to step through? Well, really, first and foremost, Zhao Zhou is letting us know and letting the magistrate know that there is no way to do Zazen. As anybody has ever found sitting on a cushion, trying to force contemplation, trying to force the way, trying to force the breath, trying to force the body just sitting as it is already on the ground, does not work. It only leads to great striving and frustration and despair. Zazen is not an exercise in doing or forcing. Instead, Jojo is saying to this magistrate, don't do. Just let your breathing happen. Let the sounds and the sensations of the world happen. After all of this, everything that is happening now, everything that is appearing from nowhere, vanishing back into nowhere, is happening only for your benefit. Don't miss it. Don't hold back. Don't try and grasp it. Don't try and control it. Don't try and corral it into any kind of particular shape or form. Let it be. This is the invitation of Zazen. This is the practice of Zazen. The extraordinary practice of not doing. And notice that Jojo is also inviting this magistrate to see that when we relinquish any kind of doing, then and only then, can we truly encounter the so-called difficulties of our life. Rather than so busily manufacturing solutions all the time, solutions or escape routes or improvements or alternatives. Rather than doing any of those things, if we don't do, then what we have been labeling difficulty can present itself fully as it is. Raw, naked, innocent, as it is. All we need to do is drop any kind of word like difficulty or any kind of label that we might want to throw at the experience that we're just having now. So yes, with practice, with sincere practice, with genuine practice of not doing, you will be in great difficulty, but not in any kind of constrained way. The difficulty here is open in all directions. It is pure possibility rather than difficulty. What an invitation this is to this magistrate stepping into this dojo. But the magistrate is perplexed. This doesn't seem to arrive in him fully, at least not immediately. And he's actually a little bit concerned about the example that Jojo might be setting for all these monks. He says, well, if you don't do practice, who do you expect to do practice? It's a bit like saying, if you're telling us all to do nothing, then who's going to follow your example? Who's going to do, what is all of this about? He's saying, who do you expect to do this practice? But again, what an interesting question this is at heart. Who do you expect to do this practice? Who does this practice? Who is doing this practice right now? Do you know? Can it be known? Practice is finding out for ourselves. And this goes directly to the fact that this way can only be experienced personally. We can't outsource the experience we're having right now. We can't ask anybody else to do it for us. And emptiness itself cannot be revealed, cannot wake up entirely without these very hands and eyes, without this very body, without all of the riches that are just so endlessly flowing forth in every moment. This is what we touch, and this is what touches us. And this is why Zazen can never be extracted from everyday activity. There is no point at which Zazen, the complete fit of your body in this world, There is no point at which this isn't thoroughly, completely, and so easily and readily revealed. This is what we touch. This is what our practice is. It requires no doing, simply being, simply resting and taking our peace in the midst of whatever is going on. And picking up on this question of the magistrates, who do you expect to do practice? If you're not doing anything, who do you expect to do it? Jojo actually walks this magistrate right back into himself. He looks at him and says, you are a person who does practice. You, just as you are. All of us, just as we are people that are doing practice. Now this walks right through the gate of doing and not doing. This is not anymore in the realm of one side or the other. Instead, you, me and you, are doing practice. The magistrate's actually a little taken aback here, which is interesting. Something is starting to reach him. He says, why? Why do you call me? Why do you call me a man who does practice? It's rather lovely. It's like saying, who, me? You're saying I am the one who does practice? Of course, this magistrate would have been wonderful at delegating, we can assume. Wonderful at getting all sorts of people to do things for him. But the way is not like that. Jojo is showing him, you are a man who does practice. Wake up to this. See it for yourself. Now, after this magistrate says, why do you call me a man who does practice? Jojo offers us something that is very moving. He actually offers this magistrate something that I think is unforgettable. He says to the magistrate, if you haven't ever practiced, how could you have managed to be a servant of the ministers of the king? Has there never been a time when you have been starving and cold and penniless, yet have pulled through? What a generous and heartfelt teaching this is. Because old Jojo is bowing to this magistrate's entire life. He's also bowing to your life and my life. Indeed, he's bowing to the struggle of all life and our intuitive capacity to pull through. Because after all, aren't we pulling through right now? Aren't we somehow managing to pull through right now, even in the midst of all of this great change that is happening all around us, all through us, impacting every dimension of where we go and who we are? I mean, I hardly need to mention the spectrum of difficulties or serious difficulty that we're all having to meet right now. We can mention all of the obvious: climate change, coronavirus, the lockdowns all over the country, the sprawl of misinformation, the inequalities of gender, of race, of you name it. All of these things are going on and on and on, and yet they are all mixing together. They are all appearing relentlessly, one moment after the other. This is what we're in. We're all feeling it. We're all feeling those pressures. I certainly feel those pressures. I certainly feel the way they are calling for change, calling for creative adaptation. With every step, they are calling on us to pull through. And the marvelous thing is that that is what we are doing. Whether we see it with open eyes or not, that is what we are doing. Just picking up on some of this wording of Zhao Zhou's. Remember, he says, has there never been a time when you have been starving and cold and penniless and yet have pulled through? Well, I might not be literally starving and cold and penniless in the most obvious senses of those words, but I am starving for action on climate change. I am cold with fear about the future for my children, for my community, for my friends, for my loved ones, for the world. And I do often feel penniless at my inability to easily influence the decisions that are being made in my name, apparently, so often. All of this I feel sharply. All of this is real to me, and I think real to everybody who is walking in this life with an open heart. How could it not be? So, with all of this going on, here we are still, pulling through, each in our own fascinating way. And what's so interesting about when we really do sit on this cushion and forget the project of doing, forget the project of controlling, how interesting it is to see how much of this pulling through is done together, done in absolute communion with the wind and the rain calling on us to pay attention. The wind buffeting Kynan house right now, calling on us to pay attention. The strange little wavers in children's voices as they are yanked in and out of school at the moment, calling on us to pay attention. How do we walk? How are we pulling through? Nothing could be more important than recognizing that this is done with no line between you, any other being, this moment, any other moment. And these words of Zhao Zhou's do appear to finally reach this magistrate. Because we're told that the magistrate shed tears and expressed his gratitude. These tears, is there any doing there? These tears, do they not fill the entire universe? These tears of the magistrate, when was the last time you shed those tears? When was the last time you shed tears and expressed your gratitude? This is pulling through. This is touching the heart of the matter. This is not avoiding difficulty. This is discovering the liberation of difficulty, of meeting it directly. Can you feel the release here in this magistrate? To be able to let go. To be able to let go. Feel all of this. Feel the miracle of how we are endlessly pulling through. And have gratitude for that. Walk and live and feel, speak, and shed tears of gratitude. So when we take up this in discussion, I'll leave you with a few just open questions from which we can enter any of the dimensions of this case and revisit any of the points of this case that may be of interest to you. But in the remaining time left in Zazen here in this particular round and in Kynan walking after it, contemplate some of this. How are you pulling through right now? Has there never been a time when you have been starving and cold and penniless, yet have pulled through? And when was the last time you shed tears and expressed gratitude? Thank you for your practice, and I look forward to taking this up together in the remaining time this morning.